Well, howdy. Merry Christmas. I'll say that again. Where I'm at, it'll be Thanksgiving in 2 days, but I'm a Christmas kind of guy. When other people do Halloween, I just start putting up my Christmas because I don't do Halloween, never have, ever will. Has it really been almost a year that we started this little journey? It's hard to believe. But they warned me years ago and I wouldn't listen. The older you get, the faster Father Time runs. That rascal needs to put some brakes on his feet. He's messing with me a little bit. We wanted to do just a couple more videos for you today. I'm going to share with you a very, very special Christmas story that happened in our home when I was just a little boy, actually. Funny thing is, I didn't even know about this story until I was full grown. That calls for a little explaining, don't it? Well, let's go back to the year 1980. Now, in the valley where I was raised, what we called our valley, there were several mill villages: Shaman, Langdale, where I was born, and where my roots will always be, Fairfax, and then a little town called Riverview, where I was raised. A town that will have a precious place in my heart until the day I draw my last breath. Now, those 4 mill villages had come to a place. Textiles was breathing its last breath of fresh air, thanks to William Farley and his kind. And it got to be that the mill villages were not going to be able any longer to become self-contained communities like they were when I was a small child. My generation is the last one that will ever know what a mill village functioned as, how it functioned. Everybody had a theater, a general store, barber shop, school, baseball field. All of that was in your village, and you didn't have to ever leave that village. General store. You could buy your groceries there, and the big things started coming along. Well, these 4 mill villages, the people there got together and they did a lot of work. If I remember right, it's more along the lines of 3 years of work they did, doing the background and all the traveling and the meetings you have to do and talking to people that's been there and done that. The idea was, should we take those 4 mill villages and combine their several talents into one brand new city? Should we do it or not? Well, I have to say, I remember going to Mr. Ralph Sugar's barbershop. And that's another thing. The last barbershop I'm aware of, and when he went to heaven, it closed. And we met there on Saturday mornings, not just for haircuts, but boy, we talked football, we talked church, and you can believe we talked this new word, incorporation. We talked that up a lot. If I remember right, younger fellows like me was all for it. And some of the older guys, they weren't really sure about all this. It always been this way. We'll get through it somehow. And the debate was real. But we didn't lose a single friend because of it. We still left that barbershop, left our churches, left our schools. We were still friends, even though we might be on the opposite side of it. A talent that's sorely missing in this world, huh? Well, anyhow, at the end of the day, having done all the requirements that we had to do, a vote was called for. I can still hear people saying, you can't do that. That's it. You've never heard this being done. You can't do this. But on election day, I want to say it was 79.6% of the voters that went to the polls, they said, oh, yes, we can do this. Well, now then, you got to go about the business of putting together a representative government, which will then do little things like have voting districts so that you can have minority representation and all those things. But you got to get started, right? You got to have a mayor. And then in the election for council, the top 5 vote getters would become your first council. These people would have to do the really hard work of setting this new city in motion. And since we'd always called it our valley anyhow, is it any wonder or surprise the name picked for this city was Valley, Alabama? I've got to say, friends, I'm Langdale born and I'm Riverview bred, and when I die someday, I'll be Valley dead. You'll never take the valley out of this old boy. Anyhow, we had that vote. It passed. Now we got to have a mayor, got to have council people. All right, so the mayor, he would be elected at large. Hugh Hood was the first mayor we had, and we couldn't have had a better one. Now the council was different. I don't remember exactly how many names was on that slate of candidates, but there had to be 8 or 10. Had to be. Only the top 5 got to go to work, see? And I was kind of like a foot soldier. I wasn't up there with the leaders of this movement called incorporation, but I was one of the foot soldiers that didn't mind doing door knocking or traveling to talk to other folks that had done this before. And I took this election very seriously. I wanted to get it right. Now, 3 of my candidates, maybe 4, I don't hardly remember. I had no trouble with those. They're set in stone, right? I'm going to vote for this. But I still had 1 or 2 that I was just kind of arguing with myself. We didn't have a bad candidate in the whole slate. But I was arguing with myself about who my next one would be. Well, I was still living at home at the time, and one day I came through the kitchen into the living room. My daddy was sitting on the couch over there watching TV. And it occurred to me to ask him. Now let me explain something to you. In my dad's generation, and especially the generation before him, asking somebody who they voted for, they could get you in a lot of trouble. People tell you quick, ain't none of your business who I voted for. Nowadays, we wear it on our shirt sleeves, right? So I was a little careful about this, but I knew Daddy knew a lot of these people for years that were candidates. And so I decided to get my phraseology in order. As I stood there in the living room that day, I said, Dad, I want to ask you a question. I said, I don't want you to tell me who you're voting for. But what I want to do is I want to pick your brain about what your thinking is, what goes into your thinking about the person you're going to vote for, right? And just tell me how you come to the decisions you have to make to pick out the 5 people you're going to vote for in this thing. My daddy looked at me, eyeball to eyeball, and he never hesitated. He didn't have a problem in the world. He said, son, the first man I'm going to vote for, the first person I'm going to vote for is going to be Bill Hayes. And I said, Bill Hayes. I said, now he runs the hardware store in Langdale, is that right? Dad said, yes. You know Bill well, you went to school with his son. And I said, I think you're right. I said, but now let me ask you a question. I said, Bill's a good businessman, real good. He's a good corporate citizen. I have no problem. If he gets elected, I promise you I'm not going to cry. But I just want to ask, how did Bill, because we've got candidates on this slate here that already have some public service in their background. So how did Mr. Bill jump up over these folks and get to be number 1 on your list, if you don't mind telling? My daddy, he looked at the floor for a minute, and he looked off to the right, and I knew he was trying to decide whether or not to tell me something that he had never told me before. When he finally looked around at me, he said, son, sit down right there in your mama's easy chair. I'll tell you a little story I've never told you before, but it seemed like now might be as good a time as any for you to hear it. Now, honey, if my daddy was going to tell me a story, he told me some stories. from his growing up. If you read my book, you know he did. And if he was fixing to tell me a story he'd never told me before, you can be assured that whatever I was fixing to go out the door and do, and I don't remember what it was, you can believe that went to the back burner quick, and I got in Mama's easy chair. And I sat down, and my daddy told me the story that I'm going to tell you. My only regret today, y'all, I've got 2 pictures of Mr. Bill that was supposed to be sitting right here. They didn't make it with me, but you hear me well. You will see those pictures and you'll hear other stories about Mr. Bill, because this man made a difference in many lives. We come back in the spring, you're going to see him. You're going to know him even better. So there sits my dad. He's going to tell me something he's never told me before, as near as I can remember it. Or you can read it in my book if you want to. This is a story that he told me. He said, son, one year, your mother and I, we had a bad year. We had a bad year. He said, your mama got sick. In fact, she was in the hospital for a while. We nearly lost her that year. It was tough. Her recovery didn't come in days. It came in weeks and maybe even months. She was really in a bad way. Couldn't work, of course. You sick like that, you got to recover. And it seemed like just as we got her back up and going, then I got sick. But I didn't have to go to the hospital or anything. But all of a sudden, I couldn't work them double shifts in the mill that I was used to working when times got a little rough. And I sure couldn't work that extra part-time job I always worked on the side when we needed a little extra pocket money. And we just didn't have stuff coming in the way we were used to having it come in. Money was scarce for us, and we looked up one day, and all of a sudden, here comes Christmas like a runaway locomotive, right straight at us. Well, we didn't know any better than to go on up to West Point, Georgia, and start shopping. You kids, all of you had things you was asking for, and we wanted it to be a good Christmas for you, and we went up to the town and started looking, and we discovered we had a problem. Because the things you kids were asking for, when we weighed it against the money that we had, the money was way down here, and what you guys were asking for was way up here. There was no way it was going to balance out. There was just no way. Daddy said we waited for the last minute sales to kick in. And we did everything we could. We went all over West Point, Georgia. We went to Kessler's. We went to the Top Dollar store. We went to every store up there just about it. And it just wasn't happening. We kept fighting and struggling, thinking we could make it work, And he said, son, I remember one day when I left West Point, Georgia, and I was by myself. And I told myself, it's the last time that I'd ever be in West Point for this year. It just wasn't going to work. Daddy said, son, when I was a boy, I was raised by a sharecropper, and a good Christmas for us, we'd get a sack and it would have fruit in it, nuts, and stuff like that. And if we was really, really lucky, we might have a little toy of some kind. And I always told myself that my kids would never have to have a Christmas like that. You would always have better. And yet on this day, when I left West Point, Georgia for the last time, it looked like I was going to have to go home and sit down with your mama. And we was going to have a talk. You kids, it didn't look like you were going to get whole lots better than I got when I was a boy. And I hated that. Didn't want that. He said, well, I got into Langdale. Now, when I got into Langdale, the first thing I saw was a sign on the right-hand side of the road. It said, Young Snowcap. And Daddy got this little twinkle in his eye. I could tell he done left his story for a minute. I thought to myself, what is this going to be? He said, son, you remember Young Snowcap, don't you? I said, yeah, I remember Young Snowcap. Who can forget that? That was a big hangout for high school kids when I was just small. And I said, let's see, they had those Indian themed burgers, right? Let's see, they had a chief burger, then they had a brave burger, then they had a squaw burger, and they even had a little old papoose burger, if I remember right. Daddy said, yeah, that's exactly right. He said, do you remember as a boy how you used to just stay after me that yes, you could eat a cheeseburger if I just get you one? I kept telling you was too little for it. And you would just go on at me about, yes, you could eat a cheeseburger. Do you remember, son? The Sunday night after church when we went to Young Snowcap, and I said, let's make a deal. I'm going to buy you a Brave burger. And if you can eat that entire Brave burger, I'll buy you your first Chief burger the next time we go. And if you can't eat all that Brave burger, you got to wait till your next birthday to say anything else to me about it. How's that? Is that fair? Well, he said, I don't remember this. Daddy said that. I said, that's plenty fair. I'll eat that Brave burger. I sure will. He said, if you don't remember making that promise to me, I know you don't remember that I had to eat half of that burger, do you? I said, Daddy, you didn't have to bring all that up now. I eat pretty good, but you ain't got to tell all that now. And he chuckled a little bit. He said, I just wanted to make sure we was on the same page. Sometimes you bit off more literally than you could chew. And that's a lesson you continue to learn, isn't it? And I said, yes, yes, I have. I really have. That's why I came to you for some advice today. And with that, he got back in his story. He said, just past Young Snowcap, there was another sign I saw. It said, Hayes Hardware. He said, do you remember that Mr. Bill's hardware store at Christmas time became a winter wonderland for kids? Toys everywhere. I said, oh yeah, I remember that. I sure do. I've got a good case of the goo-goo eyes a many a time walking up and down those aisles. I remember that now. He said, well, that's what I thought about when I saw that sign. I wasn't going to get nothing in West Point, that's for sure. And I was fixing to go home and have to tell you, Mama, we was going to have to do a bare Christmas for you guys. And I was hating that. And I said, well, Hubert, you got nothing to lose. At least go in and look. And he pulled his car in there on the side of Hayes Hardware. He went in. Mr. Bill, now, he wasn't hard to find. And Daddy said, I found Mr. Bill, and I went up to him, and I said, Bill, can we talk? You know, let me insert this. You know when somebody's got something to say to you, right? You ever had some time in your life when somebody comes to you and you know what they're getting ready to talk to you about, they don't necessarily want anybody else to hear? Well, I kind of got the idea that Mr. Bill saw that in my dad that day. I don't know that, but I have the idea he saw it, because what he said to my dad was, he said, sure, he would come on over here in my office and we'll sit down and talk. Off into his office they went. And there sits my daddy across the road, bless him, Lord, across the desk from a very successful businessman there in Langdale. And he's fixing to do something that sharecroppers and their kids didn't really like to do. Sharecroppers, if you've read this little book of mine, you know they took care of their own. They didn't accept help from outsiders unless it was just absolutely necessary. And my daddy and my mama, they, as much as they could, as often as they could, they took care of their own kids, their own family. But here sits my dad. And there wasn't anything to do but just share with Mr. Bill what he was going through. Couldn't help it. Sickness all in your family all year, and Christmas is coming, and I can't hardly stand the idea that my kids won't have a good Christmas. And Mr. Bill sat there and listened to my dad. And can you picture this? After a while, Daddy's done talking, and there's nothing to do but lean back in his chair and wait to see what Mr. Bill would say. He had no clue about what Mr. Bill was fixing to do. He didn't have any clue that Mr. Bill would even be able to help or even want to help. I think he had an idea in his mind because village people know one another, right? Still, business is business. And Mr. Bill presently began to speak. And what he said that day changed the way my daddy looked at Christmas for the rest of his life. He said, Hubert, I'll tell you what I want you to do. I want you to go out into my store, and I want you to get you a buggy. He said, get you two if you think you need it. He said, I want you to go around my store, and I want you to just fill that buggy up with everything you need for your kids to have a good Christmas. He said, now, Hubert, you're a married fella. I expect you better get your wife something too. And then he paused and he said, and by the way, Hubert, get yourself something too. It's Christmas for everybody. He said, now when you get done shopping, I don't want you to go to the checkout counter. Don't go over there. Bring your buggy in here to me. We're going to write everything up right here at my desk. I'm going to stick the bill in my desk drawer right here. He said, now after Christmas, you and Hazel, why? You'll get back about yourself and you'll go back to working regular. I know she will. And you come by here every week or so along and pay a little on that bill and pay on it till you get it paid off. And you'll have it done in no time, as many doubles as you work. Daddy looked at me that day. He was never a man. I don't think I saw him cry 3 times my whole life. He didn't cry on this day, but his water in his eyes got kind of heavy. He looked at the floor. When he looked back up at me, he said, Hugh, if Mr. Bill told me something that day, I've never forgotten. And if you'll go by it, it'll do pretty good by you too, if you'll just do it. He said, Mr. Bill looked at me and he said, Hubert, you're a hard worker. Everybody knows that. And you're as honest as the day is long. He said, I'm not going to worry about 1 penny of my money coming back to me as long as a fellow like you paying it back to me. Do I have to even tell you what that must have meant to my dad? It just boggles my mind. It had to be 20 years. We incorporated the City of Valley in 1980. This had to have happened in the early to mid 60s, maybe late 60s at the latest. So we're talking 30 years. And all that time, there's something to be said for doing right by the people you meet in this life. I wanted to end this thing. I don't think I could say to you any better than I wrote it here. The people have questions when you tell a story like this, right? And one thing I've tried to do in this little book of mine is stay true to the story. But I do have a nose and an opinion I'm not afraid to share. And this is the way. Let me see where I want to start right here. After Daddy told me this whole story, this is the way I wrote it. At the risk of repeating just a line or two, I want you to get the whole effect of it. He said, son, Mr. Bill said something to me before I left that day that has stayed with me all these years. I've never forgotten it. He said, Hubert, you're a hard worker. Everybody knows that. And you're as honest as the day is long. And I'm not going to worry about 1 dime of my money coming back to me as long as it's a fellow like you paying it back. Right here, I'll never forget Daddy looking down. I sit here and read this and I can see him that day all over again. And I swear I thought I saw his bottom lip tremble just a bit. Then he caught himself. And he looked at me, and I'll never forget these words. He said, "Son, I told you when you asked me, and I'm going to tell you again now. The very first person I'm going to be voting for in this election is going to be Bill Hayes." And then I wrote this. I said, "Friend, do I really have to tell you who got the first vote I cast in that election?" I didn't think so. Oh, I know we'll have some readers, friend, who will take me to task for telling this little story from that Christmas so long ago. They'll say that Mr. Bill and others like him in our community did not do their good deeds to be seen of men. And I understand that. I really do. I understand that. Why do you think I sat on this story more than 30 years after Dad told it to me? Listen, friend. Mr. Bill Hayes and his dear wife Virginia are a part of what Tom Brokaw once called America's greatest generation. And that generation is getting away from us way too fast. Many of them did this kind of unseen kindness behind the scenes, never wanting any attention at all. Truth be known, they're the strongest part of the fabric of the mill village I was raised in. And I just think it's high time, I think it's past time, that we take the time to give these people some time where we say that somebody noticed, somebody remembers, somebody appreciates what you did. And if any reader can't wrap their mind around that, well, the only thing left for you to do is just go suck your thumb, because I'm not changing a word of it. Too many people have gone into eternity without ever hearing words like those that I speak now about Bill and Virginia Hayes. Dear God, what I would give to know that somebody, anybody, would speak thus of me when I'm in the winter of my life. I know Mr. Bill and Virginia are still with us as I type these words. I told this little story on a Facebook page last year, and they saw it, and they loved it. Miss Virginia said so to me in a Facebook message. Perhaps by the time our readers have read this little book of mine, friend, I will have had the honor of meeting them and giving them both a big hug, and I would hope to say to Mr. Bill that he started something that Christmas, though I didn't know it 2 years later. As I think back across the years, I remember very few Christmas seasons where our family did not help at least one family have a good Christmas. My parents raised 5 children, the youngest possibly not having heard this story till she reads it in this little book of mine. All of us have tried to be a blessing to others at Christmas and other times as well. My bride and I have almost without exception helped someone at Christmas. By the way, it's 36 years now as of today. In all of our married life, and especially since that day when I heard this story for the first time, I tried to help. My wife and I have tried to help somebody every year. My 2 boys have heard this story more than once, and I have no doubt they will continue the tradition of always remembering those less fortunate at Christmas. So, Mr. Bill, you might say that your kindness to our family that Christmas is a gift that just keeps on giving. My boys will be the 3rd generation of our family to do the kind of giving you did for us. Mr. Bill lived out many times that old adage we have all heard in one form or another: no man ever stands higher than when he stoops down to help another man out of the ditch of despair and helps put him on a solid ground called hope. You can believe me, friend. As I listened and watched my daddy on this day, I saw him go through all the emotions all over again. In his selfless act of service, Bill restored hope to my dad. Bill, Virginia, I say thank you so much from the very bottom of this old man's heart for investing your lives in the lives of other people the way only special people like you can do. My daddy never forgot the act of kindness bestowed on him that day. And I'll tell you a little secret. Neither will I ever forget. I have a little postlude to this story. Mr. Bill's in heaven these days. He's been home, 3 or 4 years now. Miss Virginia's still with us, and she is anxiously waiting to see this video. I apologize, honey, that I didn't get Mr. Bill's picture here, but we're not done. Trust me on that. I promise you, I know you and Mr. Bill sat and read this book together and had fun doing it, and I'm so glad you had fun doing it. I will never forget you. I will never forget Bill Hayes. I will never forget the people who came alongside me many times when I had nothing to do but receive help that I couldn't give my own self. Neighbor, let me leave you with this. You don't know the people that you gather with this Christmas. None of you are guaranteed to be here next year. None. Why don't we agree to invest this next year living every day as though it's Christmas? Christians, if we're going to be Christ-like, all the things we do at Christmas need to be done all during the year anyway. Is that not right? In a world that seems to be just chock full of judgmental Pharisees, let's agree that we are going to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the year to come. Let's make sure that when we're gone, we live on in the stories of people who remember that we were willing to be there when nobody else would. Have you ever been there? I know some that have. Should never be that way. This Christmas, make a difference in somebody's life. Make a difference they will remember for the rest of their lives. And you can best do that, neighbor, by being the difference. You be the difference. Your Savior would not have it any other way. God bless your heart for listening to this story. I love you. Thank you for spending the year with me. We'll be back real soon. That probably means spring of next year. We got new stories coming. And we'll be happy to share them with you. Be happy to have any feedback you want to give me. Have a great holiday. Merry Christmas. Be the difference. Be the hands and feet of Jesus. Bye-bye.